The backward clock. I had been working in the Bureau of Records for nearly 12 years when I first noticed the clock on the wall of my office begin to move backward. At first, I dismissed it. My eyes, strained from endless hours of reading brittle files and transcribing names I did not recognize, had betrayed me before. The Bureau was not a kind place to the body or the mind. The air itself carried a thickness, a weight, as though every breath had to pass through paper before reaching the lungs. The clock itself was ordinary, at least it used to be. Brass frame, milk glass face, numbers painted in a neat hand, the kind of timepiece one would overlook because of how common it was. It had marked the hours of my service faithfully since the first day I was assigned to this room. But on that morning, the 17th day of March, 1930, I looked up from my desk and saw the second hand hesitate at the 12. It stuttered, twitched once, and then began to creep backward. I waited for someone else to notice. My colleagues sat at their desks, their pens scratching over ledgers, their eyes fixed downward. The sound was steady, mechanical, almost inhuman. No one raised their head. No one looked at the wall. The hand slipped back to the 11. And still, no one reacted. At first, I thought perhaps I was tired. My shift had started before dawn, as it often did, and the gray light that filtered through the bureau's tall, frosted windows did nothing to distinguish morning from afternoon. Fatigue had played tricks on me before. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The hand had moved back to the 10. I swallowed. It would have been easy to laugh it off, to tell myself the mechanism was faulty. But even as I tried, a cold certainty pressed into me, what I was seeing was real. The minutes began to follow, sliding against their natural order, descending back through the hour. I stared at the files on my desk, searching for some anchor, and saw the ink on the pages darken instead of fading, the words curling into nothing until the lines were empty once more. The smoke that had lingered near the ceiling retreated into cigarettes unlit. The creases in my sleeve unwrinkled as though freshly pressed. And still, my colleagues worked without pause. It struck me then that I could not hear the clock strike. For 12 years, its bell had ruled over our work, dividing the silence into hours, quarters, halves. But now, though the hands moved with certainty, no sound came. The bureau had slipped into a silence so profound it rang louder than bells. I tried to steady myself. Numbers, I reminded myself, were only symbols. Whether they advanced or retreated mattered little. But when my own heartbeat began to slow, falter, and then match the reversed rhythm of the second hand, I knew something far greater was at play. I could not bear it. I stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping across the stone floor. The sound was so jarring it felt almost forbidden. For the first time, one of my colleagues lifted his head. His eyes found mine, but they were empty, no flicker of recognition, no spark of thought. He looked through me as though I were transparent. Slowly, his head dipped back to his ledger, and the pen resumed its mechanical scratching. I left the office. The bureau's corridors stretched long and narrow, lined with doorways whose numbers descended instead of ascending. I moved past them quickly, each door pulling me into unease. The farther I went, the more I realized the hall was not leading me forward at all, but backward, retracing steps I did not remember taking. Rooms I had known before appeared altered, chairs arranged in corners they did not belong, shelves taller, dust thinner, walls brighter. It was not the future I was walking into, but a past. Finally, I reached the central atrium. The grand clock stood there, as it always had, dominating the space. A towering construct of wrought iron and glass, 3 stories high, its pendulum had once swung with solemn grace, like the very heartbeat of the bureau. But now, the pendulum was still. The hands on its face were unmoving, locked at an hour I could not recognize. The numbers themselves had melted into strange symbols, unreadable, shifting if I stared too long. I approached slowly. The air thickened as I neared it, resisting me as though I were pushing against invisible water. Each step grew heavier, and I felt my body resisting in ways I could not control. I reached out. My hand trembled as my fingers brushed the glass. The world lurched. I was no longer standing in the atrium. I was back at my desk. The documents before me were blank. The clock above me ticked forward, its hands innocent, as though nothing had changed. Relief flooded me, until my eyes fell upon the calendar. It was March 16, 1930. The day before. I could not move. My colleagues were as they had always been, silent and mechanical, untouched by the shift. I sat frozen, wondering if I had lost my mind. Had I stepped backward in time? Had I merely dreamed? Or was the bureau itself caught in a loop, winding itself back one day at a time, erasing us piece by piece? I wanted to dismiss it, to deny it, but when I touched the fabric of my sleeve, the crease was unnaturally smooth, as if freshly pressed. And when I dared look up at the clock, I saw the second hand twitch. Not forward. Backward. The days that followed, or perhaps I should say, the days that preceded, blurred into one another. Each morning I awoke to the same stale air, the same frosted light, the same silent colleagues. Each evening I left, only to find myself return to the day before. At first, I tried to resist. I scratched notes into the margins of my files, but by the next morning, if morning it could be called, the ink had recoiled into the pen, the paper restored to its untouched state. I tried to mark my skin, a small cut across my hand, but even wounds healed themselves backward, the blood returning into the vein as though time had repented of spilling it. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams became mirrors of the bureau itself, endless halls, descending numbers, clocks with hands that spun in both directions at once. Sometimes I dreamed of voices calling to me, low and distorted, but when I woke, the silence was complete. I began to fear that my memories themselves were being undone. Each time the clock wound backward, I felt a piece of myself dissolve, a thought, a detail, a moment. Names I had known escaped me. My own handwriting became strange, unfamiliar. I could not remember when I had first joined the bureau. I could not remember if I had ever left. Eventually, I returned to the atrium. The grand clock still stood, silent and unmoving, its face unreadable. But this time, I did not hesitate. I pressed my hand against the glass once more. The world lurched. And I was elsewhere. Not in my office, not in the atrium, not even in the bureau. I was standing in a corridor I had never seen before. The walls pulsed faintly as though alive, the air smelled of rust, and the floor sloped downward into darkness. There was no sound but the beating of my heart, forward, forward again. I walked. I do not know for how long. The corridor seemed endless, folding into itself, each step returning me to where I had begun. Yet the symbols on the walls changed, twisting and rearranging like numbers on the face of a clock that refused to hold still. At last, I came to a door. There was no handle, only a keyhole. And though I knew I held no key, I felt something heavy in my pocket. When I reached inside, I found it there, a brass key, warm to the touch, engraved with the same unreadable symbols. I lifted it to the lock. And then I was at my desk again. The clock above me ticked forward, its face ordinary, its hands steady. The calendar read March 15, 1930. 2 days before. I no longer know what day it truly is. Perhaps I have lived the same week 1,000 times, undone and repeated until I am nothing but a faint trace left on the bureau's endless ledgers. Perhaps I am already erased, writing this only for myself, knowing it will vanish with the next reversal. The clock above me twitches. Forward. Backward. Forward again. And I cannot tell anymore which way I am moving.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Thanks for listening.